How to protect your software idea. Hi, my name is Ian Reynolds. I'm a partner at Zibtek Software Development. This slideshare presentation is going to cover a number of items regarding your idea. A lot of the companies that we serve are bringing something new to market. About 20–25% of the work that we do is with startups. And a major question they have is, how do we protect the idea that we want to bring to market? So this discussion is going to cover basic steps to protect your idea, sort of a general discussion of code copyright, and really kind of who to trust. These are three important factors when it comes to making sure your idea is safe. So the first and kind of most basic things you can do are, of course, get an NDA in place. There are many free NDA templates that you can use. It's a very, very simple way of saying, hey, let's not disclose information sort of publicly about this idea. And then you can also ask for non-compete. Non-compete being, hey, if I'm going to have you do some work on something, or I'm going to talk to you about an idea, given certain proclivities, I want you to not compete with me for this in this space for this work. And then you can get these two items in place with your employees, your contractors, their subcontractors, and of course hire very carefully. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. And then, really importantly, consider the obvious, right? When you publish an application or you have software that's public, there will necessarily be probably new entrants and competition. You can't prevent someone from competing with you. It's just the way things are, right? You have Uber, you have Lyft, you have Airbnb, you have competitors. This is just the way things are. So once the idea is public, there's really kind of no limit to having competition on that idea in the public sphere. In terms of copyright, there are really kind of two things you need to consider. There's copyright and there's patents. In most states in the United States, but not all states, the way software is written defaults to copyright law, meaning that when I write the code, that expression of me writing the code myself for the application becomes copyright for me, and someone cannot just blatantly copy that code and use it elsewhere. And it's sort of a tangible expression of the idea. You can get a copyright piece of information very, very quickly, very cleanly, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Follow that with government. Patents are a little different, right? Patent is protects the idea itself. It's harder to patent software. You can much more easily copyright software. You can't necessarily patent software. Software is sort of like it's like the written language. It's like writing a paper. It's hard to patent a paper. But importantly, if you can prove ownership, you can do it. And it's probably worth exploring as you get further down the line in terms of development of your idea, exploring provisional patents. In some instances, that can be used for very unique software ideas. If you're exploring the copyright component, I'd highly recommend just go to copyright.gov, look at this circulation. You can file something with the United States Copyright Office for about $35, and really is something that you should do. Super basic. Takes a very short amount of time, and you can sort of designate components of your source code as a trade secret. And that's probably one of the most aggressive actions you can take. But again, it varies considerably per state. So per state, per jurisdiction. So you need to consult with your lawyer, see what's best for you. We'll talk about some examples of how that can vary and be different. So some quick stories. We had over the course of 10 years, of course, we've had the opportunity to serve a number of clients, and we've seen these opportunities play out, for the clients. Of course, in all our instances, our clients own their intellectual property per the agreements. But here's three stories where these sorts of things come into play. So company A had some really bad agreements in place where effectively they didn't pay enough attention to the state laws. And in Ohio, at a certain point of time, they had not paid careful enough attention to sort of the state statutes, which basically said that the writer of the code could put in certain provisions in their subcontract agreement to allow them to own the intellectual property, and effectively they held ownership of that intellectual property until it was purchased ultimately by the company after already paying for the development. So pay very careful attention to that. In your contract agreements or your other legal agreements, make sure that the developers or engineers have no ownership rights to the software unless you're sort of granting them that, and that all rights are transferred to you and to your company, without any restrictions. Second, we had another company that came to us where they were actually being held hostage by the developers because they didn't pay attention to some of the copyright components that they needed to have structured in their agreements with their employees. The employees left the company, they took the code with them and said, well, no, this is our code. And again, because of some of the components of the state legislature's unique sort of laws around code and software, they were sort of held hostage. And so they had come to us to actually rewrite from scratch their entire software program, which meant that they basically had to pay again for something that they'd already paid for. But in this case, when we rewrote it from scratch so that they owned the intellectual property tied to that. And then also they, we had stated in our contract, now this is expressly yours as long as you pay for it, et cetera. And then company C, we ran into a situation where we had a client come to us because their code was stolen by some internal resources, and they needed to sort of shore up their structural processes for maintaining code. And we have another video that's coming out that sort of discusses those things. But in terms of code theft, right, they had the copyright agreement in place, and they were able to say, no, look, this is our intellectual property. They were prove that out in court. They had agreements with the employees that stated as much, and so they were sort of protected that way. But they had to go through the legal system. So following these kind of basic steps is really, really important. And then, of course, being able to clearly prove ownership and having that paper trail is really simple, really, really kind of basic step you can do, and really won't cost anything. There's free sort of templates online, as we discussed. Again, as it relates to sort of protecting your idea, as soon as you publish your app, it's public, right? And the idea is out there for everyone to sort of consume and then also compete against. So don't assume that the idea needs to be protected so much as the code itself, right? And what the code does. That is really sort of the most valuable thing. There's no real protection for sort of public ideas, but there is protection for the unique expression of those ideas, which is in your code, and right, it sort of defaults to copyright law. Now again, to sort of restate, it differs. Some of those laws differ by state, right? So just chat with a lawyer if you've got some concerns around that, but just be mindful of that. So what else can you do? What are other real, I guess, kind of differentiators for your application and really for your business? Marketing, sales, and branding are critically important. Take, for example, the CRM market. There's over 360 CRMs on, sort of in the market that are well documented. And the reality is the difference between each of those companies is marketing, sales, and really kind of the brand they have. But they're ultimately doing the same thing. It's holding customer data, it's representing that customer data a certain way, and then it's, of course, the other elements around that. Most of what you write in software can't have copyright components or patents. It's just the way it is. It's sort of like, someone writes a word in the English language. It doesn't, just because I've written in the Wall Street Journal doesn't mean that I own the word, hello, right? It doesn't work like that, right? We have rights to that article, but we don't have rights to the particular words in the article. And so software is very much the same way. And so, the advantage of this too is that you can see what similar apps are doing, and then you can confirm, must-dos, must-haves in your application and make yourself more competitive that way. And then, the important part, the sort of most important part, going back to sort of those story elements we talked about earlier, is really hiring the right team and then hiring for redundancy. So you don't hire someone who's not going to be around after a few years. Don't hire one-man bands. We've seen too many instances where people literally and figuratively get hit by a bus, and you basically lose access to your code or lose access to something proprietary. Always hire with the idea of having some sort of structural redundancy. Hire someone who will sign those NDAs, non-competes, et cetera. Have contract ownership clearly laid out, right? Ownership of the code, ownership of the intellectual property that's being developed clearly defined in your contracts and in your employee agreements. Things like construction, you really want to, if you're going to put a new roof on your house, make sure that roofing contractor is not sort of fly by night just because the hurricanes come in. You want it to be a reputable company because you want to make sure that they're going to do a proper job. They're going to have their sort of legal paperwork, legal house in order. So, as we talk about who you can hire, Zibtek is a custom software development firm. We've been around for 10 years. We have hundreds of software programs that we've built under our belt. We've had no data breaches. All of our engineers sign non-competes and NDAs, and that carries through to our contracts. We have very secure infrastructure and a very mature process for making sure that code can't illicitly get out of the organization. And then we serve the Fortune 500. They've very aggressively vetted us, so we meet their standards, and of course carry that standard forward to all of our client projects. And here are just a couple badges, couple logos that we've served in the marketplace, and we have engineers globally, meaning we can provide very quick moving software development services, as well as have a very expensive team, which allows us to serve our clients globally. And then we deploy across about 75 different technologies. I would say there's probably more that we deploy across in this list, but these are probably some of the more common ones here. And you can reach out to us at hello@zibtek.com or call our office main line, and we'd love to talk about your idea and see how we can help. Thanks, and take care.